A scream of steel tore through the rain. Then something heavy went rolling down the ravine. A man hit his brakes. Was out of the truck before the echo finished. 40 feet below, a black sedan, overturned, headlights burning uselessly into the mud. Smoke rising. He smelled gasoline before he registered the decision to go down, which meant he was already going down, through the shattered windshield. A woman, unconscious. Breathing. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know that saving her tonight would cost him everything by morning. On the truck he'd left above, a birthday cake tilted slowly to one side. Vanilla. A child in a yellow sweater was waiting for him to come home. The gasoline smell grew stronger. Stronger meant less time. The blade pressed against the seatbelt. The rain started at 6. By 10 it had turned the mountain road into something closer to a river than a road. The kind of rain that doesn't announce itself. Just arrives. All at once. Like it had been gathering up there in the dark for hours. Deciding. Daniel Marsh drove carefully. He always drove carefully, not caution exactly. Something more like precision. The same quality that made him good with engines. The understanding that catastrophic failures almost never arrive from nowhere. They begin as small negligences. A loose bolt ignored. An inspection skipped because the schedule was tight. A sound you heard 3 weeks ago that you told yourself could wait until Friday. Daniel didn't believe in waiting. The windshield wipers were losing their argument with the rain. 40 feet of visibility, maybe less. The mountain road was 18 miles of switchbacks above a narrow ravine, and he had driven it enough times in the past 3 years that he knew every curve by the way his headlights hit the guardrail. On the passenger seat sat a white box, birthday cake. Vanilla frosting. Because Sophie liked vanilla, and he remembered that. He remembered everything about her. That was the thing about raising a child alone. You became a kind of archivist. You kept every detail because there was no one else keeping them. No one to say, remember when she... No one to finish the sentence. Just you, holding all of it. Making sure none of it got lost on the dashboard wedged against the base of the windshield where it had lived for 2 years. A photograph. Sophie on her first day of first grade. Backpack nearly as large as she was. Gap between her front teeth wide enough to whistle through. Grinning at the camera with the complete confidence of a 6-year-old who hasn't yet learned that the world has opinions about confident people. He looked at it every time the road got hard. Tonight the road was very hard. He worked as a mechanic and part-time delivery driver for Holt Freight. Mid-sized operation. 20 vehicles. Mountain corridor routes. The kind of company that fills a specific and unglamorous niche and survives by keeping costs low and expectations lower. Richard Holt had built it over 20 years through what he called operational pragmatism. What other people called it depended on where they sat in the organizational chart. If you sat at the top, it looked like smart business. If you drove the trucks, it looked like something else entirely. Daniel had been with the company 6 years. Methodical, honest, good with engines. In a company that valued those qualities primarily when they were cheap to keep, that combination had served him adequately. Not well, adequately. The pay was unremarkable. The hours were long. The trucks were older than the safety certificates suggested. And Daniel knew this the way an honest mechanic knows things. Not from paperwork. From the sound an engine makes when something is wrong that someone has decided isn't worth fixing yet. 8 months ago, he decided he couldn't ignore it anymore. He wrote the complaint carefully. Taught himself the relevant sections of Federal Transportation Safety Code, because if you're going to say something is wrong, you should be able to cite the exact number of the law that agrees with you. He identified 4 specific vehicles, documented specific deficiencies, named the regulations by number, submitted it in writing, signed his name, dated it. Richard Holt read it, filed it in a drawer, and looked at Daniel with the expression of a man who has just placed something in a category marked problems to solve at a convenient moment. That was 8 months ago. The convenient moment, it turned out, was coming sooner than Daniel knew. 3 years ago, Laura kissed him goodbye on a Tuesday morning. That's the part he kept returning to. The Tuesdayness of it. The ordinary breakfast. The ordinary kiss. The walk to the school bus stop where she held Sophie's hand, and Sophie complained about her backpack strap, and Laura adjusted it and then stood at the curb watching the bus until it disappeared around the corner. That was the last thing she did. Adjusted the strap, stood at the curb, watched the bus go. By noon she was gone. A brain aneurysm. No warning, No long illness to brace against, no gradual goodbye, just a phone call from Ridgeline General Hospital at 12:17 p.m., and a doctor's voice doing what doctors' voices do when the news is the worst kind, and then a silence that moved into the apartment like something that had decided to stay permanently. Daniel took 2 days off work. Then he went back. Because the rent didn't pause for grief. Because Sophie's asthma medication wasn't free. Because Holt Freight didn't have a bereavement policy that acknowledged a man might need more than 48 hours to figure out how to be two parents at once. He went back. He kept going back. That was the only philosophy he had. Keep going back. Keep showing up. Keep the photograph on the dashboard so you remember who you're doing it for when the doing gets very difficult. At 4 in the afternoon, his phone buzzed. Richard. Text message. Terse in the way of men who believe brevity demonstrates authority. One more run. North Corridor. Package at depot. Needs to reach Harlan Junction by midnight. You're the only one available. Daniel stared at the message for 10 seconds. The North Corridor run was not on his schedule. 60 miles round trip on mountain roads. 3 additional hours on a day that had already started at 6 in the morning. And it was Sophie's birthday. She would be waiting. He had promised, he typed, "It's not my scheduled route. Can someone?" Because he knew the answer. He knew the calculus Richard ran when a driver pushed back on an unscheduled request. He knew the file drawer, the mental category, the convenient moment that was apparently arriving faster than expected. He knew the prescription refill was due at the end of the month. He knew the number in his savings account and the number on the rent bill and the very thin margin between them. He typed, "I'll take it." He pulled the birthday cake from the shop refrigerator at 5:30. Vanilla. White box. He had bought it 2 days before because he didn't trust himself to remember on the day itself. Already running late when he picked up the package at the depot. Already doing the math in his head. If he moved fast, hit no delays, made Harlan Junction by 9:30. He could be home before 10. Sophie went to bed at 9 on school nights. But birthdays were different. She'd wait. She always waited. He just needed the road to cooperate. The sound came at 10:47 p.m. Not subtle. Not the kind of thing you wonder about. The catastrophic percussion of steel meeting guardrail at speed, the shriek of tires failing to hold, then below and away from road level, the grinding, crashing, rolling concussion of something heavy going down an embankment in the dark. Daniel hit his brakes, was out of the truck before the echo finished. He leaned over the guardrail and saw it immediately. Black sedan. Overturned. 40 feet below on a narrow ledge, tilted against a cluster of rocks, headlights still burning uselessly into the mud. The car had rolled at least twice on the way down. You could tell by the shape of it now, which was no longer the shape a car is supposed to be. Smoke rising from the engine compartment. Daniel smelled gasoline before he'd registered the decision to go down. Which meant he was already going down. Emergency kit from behind the seat. Box cutter, flashlight, work gloves. Tow rope he'd carried so long it was practically part of the truck. He went over the guardrail and down the embankment, the slope steep and wet, sliding most of the way on his boots, catching himself on scrub brush and outcroppings, arriving at the car in less than a minute from the sound. The gasoline smell was stronger here. Stronger meant less time. Through the fractured windshield, Woman, 40s, unconscious, seatbelt locked tight from the force of the roll, pinning her at an angle that made extraction impossible without cutting it. Head turned away from the impact point. Chest moving. Breathing. He worked fast, not frantic. Fast, there's a difference. Frantic is what happens when your mind races ahead of your hands. Fast is what happens when your hands know exactly what to do, and your mind has the sense to get out of the way. Daniel's hands had been solving mechanical problems for 15 years. They knew things his conscious mind had never formally learned. Box cutter on the seatbelt, clean cut. One motion, door handle, jammed. Impact had warped the frame. His shoulder against it with the controlled violence of a man who understands metal deformation. Not brute force. The right angle. The right point. The right amount of body weight applied precisely. The door gave, arms around her. And he pulled her clear with the kind of effort that leaves marks in muscle for days. He was 15 feet up the embankment when the fuel tank found its ignition point. The explosion wasn't cinematic. It was brutal and brief. A wave of heat hit his jacket hard enough to push him forward on the slope. Something caught the back of his left hand. Sharp, fast. Gone. He didn't stop moving, got her to the road. Laid her carefully on the shoulder on her side, the way you put someone down when you don't know what's broken and don't want to make it worse. Checked her pulse, checked her breathing. Still there, both of them. He called 911. Gave the location precisely. Mile marker, mountain road designation. Distance from the nearest junction. Described her condition without medical jargon because he didn't have medical jargon. Just observations, unconscious. Possible head injury, no visible arterial bleeding, breathing steady, pulse present. The dispatcher asked him to stay on the line. He stayed, listened to sirens beginning to wind up from the valley below. Getting closer, getting louder. When he could see emergency lights coloring the wet air around the bend below, he lowered the phone, wrapped his hand with the shop rag from his jacket pocket. The rag came away darker than he would have liked. He pressed it back, applied pressure. He got back in his truck, didn't give his name, didn't wait to be thanked. It was 10 minutes past 10. The birthday cake on the passenger seat had been jostled by the scramble down the slope and was now listing noticeably to one side. He drove with his injured hand resting on his knee, the other on the wheel. He thought about nothing except getting home. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator had been broken for 8 months. The landlord had stopped responding to messages about it, sometime around month 4, which Daniel had accepted with the pragmatism of a man who has learned to conserve outrage for things he can actually change. He climbed the stairs quietly, carrying the tilting cake, hand wrapped in the dark rag, jacket smelling of smoke and rain. He found Sophie exactly where he feared she would be, asleep at the kitchen table, her head resting on her folded arms. Beside her, a small birthday cake she had bought with her allowance, the kind in a clamshell container from the grocery store down the block, a single candle in it. The candle had burned almost entirely down, a small stub of wax surrounded by a thin ring of frosting discolored by heat. She was wearing the yellow sweater. She saved it for special occasions. He had known this since she was 5, and explained to him with complete seriousness that some clothes were for every day, and some clothes were for important days. The yellow sweater was an important day sweater and should be treated accordingly. She had worn it to wait for him. And she had waited as long as she could. Daniel set his cake down beside hers. Sat in the chair across. Looked at his daughter in the quiet kitchen, with the rain still going outside and the candle stub cold and 2 birthday cakes side by side on the table. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from disappointing someone who loves you without condition. It's different from other kinds of pain. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles. He reached across and touched her shoulder. Sophie stirred, lifted her head, blinked at him with the slow, trusting confusion of a child coming up from deep sleep, saw his face, smiled. The immediate, uncomplicated smile of someone simply glad you're there. Then she saw his hand, the dark rag. Her eyes sharpened with the alertness children develop when they've been worried about a parent for a long time and have learned to read the signs. What happened to your hand? I stopped to help someone. On the mountain road. There was an accident. She looked at him for a moment, steady. The way she always looked at him when she was deciding something. Didn't ask if he was okay. She could see he was okay. Didn't ask about the birthday. She could see both cakes. She climbed out of her chair, walked around the table, and wrapped both arms around his neck with the full, unself-conscious weight of an 8-year-old who has decided this is what the moment requires. Said it quietly. Right next to his ear, Dad. Mom would have done the same thing. Daniel held his daughter and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that would have improved on that. They lit both candles. The cold stub on hers and the single candle he found in the kitchen drawer. Sang happy birthday in the quiet voices as people use when they don't want to bother neighbors at 10:30 on a school night. Ate cake at the kitchen table. Sophie with the focused pleasure of a child who takes dessert seriously. Daniel mostly watching her and occasionally taking a bite to seem less like he was just watching her. The cakes were different. Hers chocolate with chocolate frosting. His vanilla with white frosting that had survived the mountain, mostly. She said his was better. He said hers was better. They compromised by eating both. He tucked her in at 11, checked her evening inhaler. Sat on the edge of the bed after she closed her eyes. Not quite ready to leave the room, Dad? Yeah. The lady you helped. Is she going to be okay? He thought about the pulse under his fingertips, the chest moving, The sirens, I think so. Sophie was quiet. Then, good, he turned off the light. Was washing his injured hand at the kitchen sink when his phone buzzed. Richard Holt. Direct message. No greeting. Be at the office at 7 a.m. sharp. We need to talk. Daniel read it twice. Felt the specific dread of a working man who has done nothing wrong, but understands that the wrong people have the power to rewrite what nothing wrong looks like. Dried his hand. Wrapped it properly with the bandage from the first aid kit. Went to bed. Didn't sleep easily, but he slept. Richard Holt was 51 years old and had built the company from a 2-truck operation through genuine industry knowledge and a management philosophy that treated people as variable costs to be minimized. Not a stupid man. Something more specific. A man who had decided early in his career that the path of least resistance led downward. That safety protocols were negotiating positions, that workers who raised concerns were threats to be neutralized rather than signals to be heard. That documentation existed primarily to establish plausible deniability rather than to reflect reality. He had fired 3 drivers in the past 2 years for raising maintenance concerns. He had a drawer in his office containing things that were supposed to be filed with the State Transportation Authority, and were not. He had, in the 8 months since Daniel's complaint landed on his desk, been waiting for the convenient moment. That morning he decided it was convenient. Daniel arrived at 6:55, came in his work jacket covering the burn marks, hand properly bandaged, looking like what he was, a man who had slept badly and was here anyway because that's what you do. His supervisor, a cautious man named Cobb, was waiting in the corridor outside the conference room. 11 years with Holt Freight. Developed over those years the particular moral posture of a man who has seen things he wished he hadn't, and responded by becoming very interested in his own job security. Richard wants to see you in conference. What's it about? Cobb looked at his shoes. I think you know, conference room. Richard at the head of the table. 3 other managers present as witnesses. Not because they were necessary, because an audience changes the calculus of a confrontation, gives the person at the head of the table more to perform for. Richard presented the case with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done this before. The charges were clear. Daniel had abandoned his final delivery route the previous evening, had arrived this morning after the time Richard had specified, did not mention the meeting time had been sent by text at 11 p.m., did not acknowledge the delivery route had been added to Daniel's schedule without notice at 4 in the afternoon. Daniel listened, then said steadily what had happened. The sound on the mountain road, the car in the ravine, the woman, the fuel tank, the explosion that caught his hand. Richard listened with the expression of a man hearing a story he has already decided is false. You have no documentation, no police report, no witness. The paramedics would have a record. There'll be camera footage from the road monitoring system. That's not my concern. Let the sentence finish itself. Then added, and frankly, your pattern of insubordination makes this decision straightforward. Insubordination. The word arrived with deliberate weight. Everyone in the room understood which 8-month-old document it referred to. Daniel looked around the table, Cobb looking at his notepad, the 3 managers looking at the middle distance where nothing useful lived. He understood. This had been decided before he walked in. The room was not a conversation. It was a notification. Employment terminated effective immediately. Final paycheck withheld pending assessment of damages related to undelivered freight. Security would escort him from the building. Then Richard added something else. In the conversational tone of a man who believes power is demonstrated through casual cruelty, said what a shame it was. A single father, unable to manage basic professional responsibilities. A man in Daniel's position really couldn't afford these kinds of choices. He hoped Sophie, used her name, which meant he had looked it up, which meant this had been prepared, would understand when things got difficult. Daniel heard those words, felt something go very still inside him. The way things go still before they either break or harden into something that cannot be broken. Said nothing, did not raise his voice. Did not give Richard Holt the satisfaction of a reaction. Stood, picked up the small paper bag with his personal items that Cobb had quietly brought from his locker, because Cobb had known this was coming and had done that much, at least. Nodded once to the room, walked out. The security guard who walked him out was a young man named Kevin. They had eaten lunch together maybe 30 times over 3 years. Kevin walked beside him with his eyes on the floor. Jaw tight, Daniel said. "It's fine, Kevin." Kevin didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. They went out through the front entrance. The door closed, and Daniel stood in the freight district mourning, hand bandaged, paper bag in hand, jacket smelling faintly of last night's smoke. No income. Medication refill due at the end of the month. He thought about the math, then stopped thinking about the math, then thought about it again. He drove home, made coffee he didn't drink, sat at the kitchen table where Sophie's birthday cake was still there, covered in plastic wrap, half-eaten, opened the calculator on his phone, looked at the numbers, closed it, opened it again as if the numbers might have changed. They hadn't changed. He sat there, the apartment very quiet. Sophie at school. Rain had stopped sometime in the night, and the morning was gray and still. From the kitchen window, he could see the parking lot below and the mountains beyond it, dark against a pale sky. Still sitting there at 10:30 when someone knocked on his door. August Riley lived in the apartment directly below. 67 years old, retired. He kept different hours than the rest of the building. Up at 5, in bed by 9, moved through common spaces at times when he was unlikely to encounter people who made unnecessary noise. He had lived there 4 years, and Daniel had learned, through shared walls and coincident schedules, the particular things you learn about a neighbor you never formally got to know. August made real coffee, the kind that smelled like an actual decision. Read the newspaper every morning in paper form, folded correctly. Had, very occasionally, left baked goods outside Daniel's door with a note that said something like "more than I needed, hope useful," which was the most August Riley way of being kind that Daniel could imagine. He had never knocked on Daniel's door at 10:30 in the morning. Daniel opened it. August looked at the bandaged hand. Then at Daniel's face. Then at the paper bag sitting on the kitchen table behind him. "I heard you come in last night. And I heard you go out this morning before 7. I'm fine. I know you're fine." A pause. The pause of a man who has measured what he's about to say and decided to say it. "I spent 30 years as a federal safety inspector, FMCSA. Retired in 2019, another pause. "I know Holt Freight." Daniel went still. Not the angry stillness from the conference room. Something different. The stillness of a man who has been carrying something very heavy, alone, for a long time, and has just heard someone else acknowledge the weight. "I know what a drawer full of unfiled complaints looks like," August said. "I've seen what happens to the men who put things in drawers. And I know the sound of someone coming home from a mountain road at midnight." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a business card worn at the corners, the kind you keep because you intend to use it someday, even when you're not sure when. His name is Walt Bridger. Still active at the FMCSA. "I trained with him in the 90s. He's the kind of man who answers his phone." Daniel looked at the card. "The trucks you filed about," August said. "Are they still running? A beat?" "Yes." August nodded, not surprised, not satisfied. Just confirming what he already understood. "Then this isn't only about your job," and quietly, "that vehicle on Route 11. The brake failure, 14 months ago. That was a Holt truck." Daniel looked up. "It wasn't reported to the state authority," August said. "I know because I was still checking filings back then. Old habit. A man retires, he doesn't stop reading." He tapped the card once. "Walt will answer. Documentation always exists somewhere. He'll know where to find it." Turned and went back down the stairs. Daniel stood in his doorway looking at the business card, then went inside. Sat back down at the kitchen table. Put the card next to his phone. Looked at both of them. Then called Walt Bridger. 40 miles away. A woman opened her eyes. She spent the first careful seconds assessing what she knew. Her name was Claire Weston. She was in a hospital bed. The particular quality of ache across her ribs and the pressure behind her eyes told her she had been in a significant accident. She was alive when she could very easily not have been. She knew all of this with the unsentimental clarity of someone who has learned to process difficult information without flinching, because her work required it. A doctor came in. 3 cracked ribs, mild concussion, bruising consistent with the way a person moves inside a car that is rolling. She listened, asked 2 questions about her recovery timeline, then said, "Who pulled me out?" The doctor told her what he knew, which was not much. A man had called 911, had stayed until paramedics arrived, had not given his name or waited for acknowledgement. The paramedics noted The car was fully engulfed by the time they reached the scene. The seatbelt had been cut with something sharp. Whoever extracted the driver had done so in an extremely narrow window. That was all. Claire looked at the ceiling, then said, "Get me Naomi." Naomi Ashford arrived within the hour, 38 years old. Claire's executive assistant for 6 years. Efficient and loyal in the way of people who understand their value is tied to results. She had learned over 6 years to anticipate what Claire needed before Claire finished the sentence. Claire gave her the approximate time and location. Said, "Find him." Naomi found him in 2 hours. The plate on the pickup matched a registration for a Daniel Marsh. Age 34. Valley address below the mountain road. Mechanic and delivery driver. Single father. And Naomi noted this herself, without being asked, because she had learned to note things that felt significant. Terminated that morning from Holt Freight. Grounds, abandonment and insubordination. She put the summary on Claire's tablet. Claire read it without expression. Write it again. Then Naomi opened the second document, the acquisition review file that Claire's team had spent 6 weeks assembling. Claire had been reviewing it on the way to the airport when the road went wrong. Page 47. Naomi said Claire turned there, a formal written complaint filed 8 months ago by a D. Marsh. Brake deficiencies on 4 identified vehicles. Federal regulation citations by number. Submitted in writing, signed, dated. No documented response. No corrective action. Filed, as far as anyone could tell from the records, in a drawer. Claire said nothing for a long moment. Page 53. Naomi had already turned there, the incident report from 14 months ago. A driver named Darnell Pruitt, Route 11. Brake failure, property damage. Driver unhurt. Report filed internally, closed as driver error. No notification to the State Transportation Authority, which was required by law within 5 days of any reportable incident. The vehicle in the Route 11 incident carried the same fleet number as one of the 4 vehicles Daniel had identified in his complaint. Claire closed the tablet, looked out the hospital window. The mountains gray and wet in the morning light. Beautiful. In the way things are beautiful when you've recently been reminded they can kill you. She was alive because a man she had never met went down an embankment in the rain. A man who had also, 8 dark months ago, tried to do something about the vehicles on those roads through proper channels, who had been ignored. Then fired for stopping to save the life of someone whose company was reviewing the company that fired him. She picked up her phone, called her legal team. This is the part nobody tells you about choices. The part where you don't know what you've set in motion. Daniel sat at his kitchen table with August Riley's card and the sound of Walt Bridger's voice still in his ear. Walt had listened, asked specific questions, said, "Send me what you have," in the tone of a man who has been waiting for someone to send him what they have. Daniel typed up everything, the vehicles, the dates, the specific regulatory violations from his original complaint. Sent it. He didn't know that 40 miles away, a woman was reading his name for the second time in 24 hours. Didn't know about the acquisition. Didn't know about page 47. Didn't know that what he'd done on the mountain road and what he'd done 8 months ago at this same table. The careful letter, the cited regulations, the signed name at the bottom, were about to turn out to be the same action. He just knew the medication refill was due at the end of the month. That Sophie had a science project about ecosystems she hadn't started. That the plant on the windowsill needed water. He watered the plant, cleaned up the 2 birthday cake containers from the table, rinsed them, threw them away, kept the white box from the vanilla cake, for no particular reason, in the cabinet under the sink, sat back down. Looked at the mountains through the kitchen window. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. Slow and gray and incremental, the light returning not all at once but in degrees, as if it needed to make sure the rain was really finished before committing. By noon, the mountains were visible, sharp, still, clean. Daniel Marsh sat at his kitchen table with no income and a bandaged hand and a business card from a man named Walt Bridger and a plant on the windowsill that had just been watered, somewhere in the machinery of the world that runs underneath visible things. The phone calls, the files, the connections between events that don't reveal themselves until the distance is sufficient. Something that had started 8 months ago with a signed letter in a drawer was beginning, slowly and without announcement, to move. He didn't know that yet, but he would. 3 days after the accident, Claire Weston checked herself out of Ridgeline General against medical advice. The doctor used phrases like strongly recommend and minimum observation period and liability concerns. Claire listened with the expression she used in board meetings when someone was explaining something she had already decided. Signed the forms, put on the clothes Naomi had brought, and walked out with 3 cracked ribs and a concussion that made the fluorescent hallway lights feel like a personal insult. Naomi was waiting with the car. "You should have stayed another day. I've read the file twice. That's not what 3 times. Once last night. Twice this morning, Claire lowered herself into the passenger seat with the careful precision of someone whose ribcage has strong opinions about sudden movements. Pull up everything we have on Holt Freight. Not the acquisition summary. Everything. Every maintenance log, every driver record, every incident report going back 5 years. Naomi pulled into traffic. Didn't argue. She had learned that arguing with Claire Weston after a decision was approximately as productive as arguing with weather. The Route 11 incident, Claire said. "I want to know who was in that truck, Darnell Pruitt." Where is he now? He's not at Holt Freight anymore. Left 9 months ago. But he's still in the area. I have an address. Claire looked out the window at the mountains. Sharp and clean in the morning light. Find him, she said, and get Daniel Marsh's contact. Already done. Daniel Marsh. Meanwhile, was sitting in his personal truck outside a garage on the east side of the freight district. Not his work truck. That belonged to Holt Freight and had been returned 2 days ago. Driven back with the same care he'd given it for 3 years, because that's how he did things, regardless of circumstances. He was in his own vehicle. A 2009 Ford pickup with 212,000 miles and a heating system that worked on its own schedule. The garage was called Kellerman's. He'd done 2 shifts there in his early 20s before Holt Freight offered steadier hours. He knew the owner. Had called that morning, the owner said, "Come by. We'll talk." Talking had lasted 11 minutes. Friendly at first. Then the owner said he needed to know what happened at Holt Freight. Not the official version, Daniel told him. The safety complaint, the drawer, the termination, told it simply, just the sequence of facts in the order they happened. The owner nodded, said he needed to think. Said he'd be in touch. That was 40 minutes ago. Daniel was still sitting in the parking lot, because going home meant sitting at the kitchen table doing the math again. And the math hadn't changed. And doing math that hasn't changed doesn't accomplish anything except making the walls feel closer. His phone buzzed unruinal number. Local area code. He almost didn't answer it. Answered it, "Mr. Marsh?" A woman's voice. Precise, efficient without being cold. "My name is Naomi Ashford. I'm calling on behalf of Claire Weston. You don't know her, but she'd like to speak with you if you're available." "Who?" A brief pause. "You pulled her out of a car on the mountain road 3 nights ago. He sat with the black sedan, the rain, the smell of gasoline. He hadn't thought about her as a person with a name. He'd thought about her as a pulse, a breathing chest, a weight he carried up a wet embankment in the dark. Is she okay? 3 cracked ribs and a concussion. She checked out of the hospital this morning. She should have stayed longer. A different pause. Like Naomi was filing that response somewhere for later. She said the same thing, actually, about you, a beat. She'd like to meet. At your convenience. There's something she wants to discuss. At your convenience. He had nothing but convenience right now. Inconvenient thought. But accurate. When, he said. August Riley. 1 floor below had been paying attention, not eavesdropping. Paying attention. There's a difference. Eavesdropping is trying to hear what people don't mean to say. Paying attention is noticing what's already visible to anyone willing to look. He had spent 30 years paying attention. It was the core skill of his profession. You walk into a facility, look at the paperwork, look at the vehicles, look at the faces of the people who work there, and listen for the specific silence of people who know things they've been told not to say. He recognized that silence. He'd heard it in Daniel's voice 3 days ago. Not in the facts, which Daniel told cleanly and without drama, in the space around the facts. The exhaustion of someone who had tried to do something right and been made to pay for it and was carrying both the rightness and the payment with no indication that either would be acknowledged. August had made his phone call to Walt Bridger the same night Daniel did. Didn't tell Daniel, just did it. Because there was a truck running a mountain corridor with brake problems that had been documented 14 months ago and never fixed, And that was not a story about job security or corporate politics or a single father's difficult week. That was a story about what happens next on that road. And August Riley, who had spent 30 years thinking about what happens next on that road, wasn't going to sit in his kitchen and drink his coffee and do nothing. He had done nothing once. In 1998, a facility in the eastern part of the state found inconsistencies in maintenance logs, brought it to his supervisor, then told the situation was being managed, let it go. 6 weeks later, a driver went through a guardrail on the interstate. He had never let it go again, so he called Walt, gave him what he knew. Fleet numbers he had matched from old records against current Holt freight registration. The Route 11 incident and the missing regulatory filing, Walt said, "Give me 48 hours. That was 2 days ago." August's phone rang at 7 a.m. the morning after Daniel's truck came back without Daniel in it. He answered. Walt said 3 words. "I found the file." The file was not a small thing, the Route 11 incident report. The original, unaltered version, submitted to the State Transportation Authority by the responding officer at the scene. Never matched to Holt Freight's internal closure report. Sitting in a state database for 14 months without anyone connecting the missing regulatory notification to the absence of one, because no one had been looking. Because no one had been given a reason to look. Until now. Walt had also found a pattern, not one incident, not 2. Across 5 years of Holt Freight operational records, 3 other incidents involving the same fleet group, 2 classified as driver error, 1 as road condition. None with a corresponding regulatory notification. None with a documented vehicle inspection following the incident. August sat with his coffee and listened to Walt list them. He thought about what that pattern meant for the driver on that road next week. "What do you need from me?" he said. "The photographs Pruitt took, and a written statement confirming what you found in the registration records. You'll have both by end of day." He hung up, poured more coffee, sat for a moment, then got out his reading glasses, opened his laptop, and began to write. Darnell Pruitt lived in a duplex 20 minutes south of the freight district. 41 years old. Big man. The kind of build that comes from 15 years of physical work rather than any deliberate effort. He'd been driving trucks since he was 24. Had worked for 6 different freight companies, which was not unusual in corridor industry, where companies came and went with the economic seasons. Worked for Holt Freight for 3 years. Left 9 months ago. He didn't tell people why he left. Not because he was hiding anything. More because when you try to explain leaving a job for reasons fundamentally about your conscience, people either believe you completely or don't believe you at all, and the ones who don't believe you make the conversation worse than just not having it. Before he left, he had been the driver of the vehicle involved in the Route 11 incident. 14 months ago, early morning run, descending grade on the south approach. He felt the brake pedal do something it wasn't supposed to do. Not fail completely, hesitate, a fraction of a second. The wrong fraction. He pumped it. Got the truck stopped. Property damage only. A fence. Part of a retaining wall. Filed the incident report the same day. Detailed, specific. Named the vehicle. Named the brake anomaly. Requested formal inspection. The report came back, stamped resolved inside a week. No inspection had occurred. He knew this because he checked. Asked the maintenance supervisor to show him the inspection log. The supervisor said it was on file. Darnell asked to see it. The supervisor said he'd have to request it through management. He requested it through management. Richard Holt called him in. Sat him down. Spoke for 15 minutes about team culture and operational trust and the way unfounded concerns could damage morale in a workforce that depended on confidence to function. Darnell listened to all of it. Then he said, "I want to see the inspection log." He was transferred to the worst route in the operation the following week. 60 miles of mountain road both ways. Graveyard shift. He stuck it out for 5 months, then quit, hadn't filed anything, hadn't called anyone, hadn't talked about it. He'd kept one thing. The morning after he filed the incident report, before the stamp came back, before the conversation with Richard Holt, he had taken photographs of the original report with his phone, every page. Time-stamped. He didn't know why exactly, just knew that things were about to get complicated, and complicated things sometimes came down to having documentation versus not having documentation. Kept the photographs on his phone. Backed them up to a drive Because the thing you don't think you'll need is the thing you can't find when you need it. He was sitting on his front steps at 6 p.m. when a car he didn't recognize pulled up. The woman who got out moved carefully. Like her ribs hurt. She introduced herself as Naomi Ashford and said she was there on behalf of someone who wanted to understand what happened on Route 11. Darnell looked at her for a moment. "You want the photographs?" Naomi blinked once. Just once. "Yes, come inside." Daniel drove to the address Naomi had texted him, not the hospital. Claire had been clear about that. She was done with hospitals, a hotel in the valley, the kind with meeting rooms attached to the lobby, for conversations that need to happen in neutral territory. He wore the same jacket. Burn marks on the back now faded enough that you had to know they were there to see them. Hand healing. Still tight. Still occasionally reminded him of its existence when he gripped something wrong. He was early, sat in the lobby for 11 minutes. Tried not to do the math. Did it anyway. Reminded himself that whatever this meeting was, it probably wasn't going to make the math worse than it already was. Naomi met him at the entrance. Walked him down a short corridor. Stopped outside a door. "She's going to thank you." "She means it. Let her finish before you say it wasn't a big deal." "It wasn't. Let her finish, not unkind. Just definitive." She opened the door. Claire Weston was standing when he entered. A choice. The ribs would have preferred sitting. But she had decided, somewhere between the hospital and this room, that whatever this conversation was, she was going to be standing for it. 40s. Dark jacket. The kind of compose that comes not from being untouched by things, but from having decided how you're going to hold them. Daniel stopped 2 steps inside the door, and something happened in his face that Naomi, watching from the doorway, would later describe as the only time she had ever seen him look genuinely surprised, because he recognized her, not her name, not who she was, her face, the angle of it, the structure underneath, which was the same whether lit by orange firelight on a mountain ledge or the controlled lighting of a hotel meeting room, took him 2 full seconds. She watched him put it together, said his name. Quietly, like a fact she'd been holding for 3 days and was finally setting down. Then, "Thank you," not with tears, not with performance. With the weighted sincerity of someone who has thought carefully about words and means exactly the ones they choose. "I'm alive because of what you did," she said. "I know it cost you your job. I intend to address both of those things. But first there's something I want you to know." Opened the folder on the table beside her, turned it so he could see. Page 47. His own complaint. His own handwriting in the signature line. His own citations, by number, of the federal regulations he had spent 2 evenings teaching himself to cite correctly. "I was reviewing the Holt Freight acquisition file in the car," she said. "Before the accident, your complaint was in it. Filed 8 months ago. No response. No corrective action." A pause. "The man who wrote that complaint and the man who came down the embankment are the same man. That's not coincidence. That's character." Daniel looked at the page. "I didn't do anything any decent person wouldn't do." Mint it literally. "Not modesty. That's exactly the problem," Claire said. "Not every decent person does do it. Especially when it carries a cost." She closed the folder. "The difference between having values and living by them when it's inconvenient. That's not a small difference. That's the whole thing." Daniel looked at the floor, then back at her. "I'm glad you're all right," he said. "Both insufficient and exactly right. Things that move slowly and things that move fast." Claire Weston's legal team moved fast. The acquisition of Holt Freight was not structurally complicated. The company carried significant debt, revenue inconsistent, safety liability exposure, which the legal team spent 48 hours quantifying, was substantial and growing. Richard Holt was told only that a regional logistics holding company was interested in expanding its corridor presence. Was not told the name of the principal. Was not told the principal had spent 3 days in Ridgeline General reviewing his acquisition file with the focus of someone recently reminded that the vehicles in that file use real roads with real physics. Richard made several errors during negotiation, underestimated the buyer's capital position, overestimated his own leverage, agreed to terms giving the buyer effective operational control within 48 hours because he believed, with the unshakable confidence of a man who has never been seriously wrong before, that the deal was favorable to him. He signed on a Friday afternoon, went home with the quiet satisfaction of a man who believes he has just solved a problem. Darnell Pruitt showed up at Daniel's door on a Wednesday afternoon. Daniel hadn't expected him. Opened the door to a big man he vaguely recognized, not from memory exactly, but from the specific category of person you see across a depot parking lot for 3 years without ever being formally introduced. "You're Marsh." "Yeah, I drove for Holt. Left 9 months ago." A pause. "I was in the Route 11 truck." Something shifted in the air between them. The way a room shifts when someone puts something important on the table. Daniel stepped back from the door. Darnell came in. Sat at the kitchen table. Same table where the math happened every night. Where Sophie did homework. Where 2 birthday cakes had been side by side. Darnell put his phone on the table and showed Daniel the photographs. 12 images. Every page of the original incident report. Time-stamped 3 hours after the Route 11 accident. Before the stamp came back. Before the conversation with Richard Holt. Before any of the things that followed, Daniel looked at them. "You kept these?" "Yeah." "For 9 months?" "Yeah." Darnell picked up the phone, put it back in his pocket. "I didn't know what to do with them. I just knew I couldn't delete them." Daniel understood that completely. The specific weight of knowing something that nobody official is willing to confirm. The way you carry it because you don't know what else to do with it. The vehicle in these photos. The fleet number. Same one in your complaint. "I looked it up after I heard you filed." Darnell's voice was flat. Not angry. Past anger. "It's still running the North Corridor." They sat with that. "I got a call," Daniel said. "From a woman named Naomi Ashford." Darnell nodded. "Me too. Yesterday. She tell you why?" "Enough." Darnell looked at the table. Then at Daniel. "You the one who pulled someone out of a car on the mountain road last week?" "Yeah, the woman." "She's the one buying the company?" "That's what I understand." Darnell sat with that, the kitchen quiet. Afternoon light coming through the window. The plant Daniel had watered this morning. The photograph of Sophie on the refrigerator door. "What happens now?" Darnell said. "I don't know exactly," which was the truth. He knew Naomi Ashford had called twice. He knew August Riley had been on the phone with someone at a federal agency. He knew the photographs on Darnell's phone existed, and they were the kind of thing that changes the shape of what's documented versus what's just known. He knew the truck was still running the North Corridor. That was the part he kept coming back to. Not his job, not the math, not the medication refill or the rent, the truck, still running. "Because no one had stopped it, can you send me those photographs, or?" "Already sent them to that Ashford woman." "Send them to me too," Darnell did. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Monday. Richard Holt arrived at 8:55 in a new blazer. He had bought the blazer on Saturday. This was not a detail he would later choose to recall, but it was true. He went to a department store and bought a new blazer because he was going to be introduced to new ownership, and he believed in the visual communication of authority. He expected to walk into a room where he would be introduced as the previous owner, staying on in an advisory capacity. He had prepared remarks. The conference room was full when he arrived. Every driver, every dispatcher, every manager, the people who loaded and unloaded, the maintenance crew. Kevin, the security guard, told to be present by someone Kevin hadn't met before, at the far end of the table, standing. A woman Richard Holt had never seen. She was calm in the way people are calm when they are not worried about the outcome of a confrontation. He sat down. The room was very quiet. She said her name. Said that as of Friday afternoon, she was the sole owner of Holt Freight. Said it the way you state a fact you expect your audience to already know. Richard looked at her. "I wasn't told the name of the buyer." "No," she said. "You weren't?" Silence. "I have one matter to address before anything else." She looked at Cobb, sitting 3 chairs to Richard's left. "I'd like to see the termination file on Daniel Marsh." This was the moment. Not the explosion on the mountain road. Not the decision to go over the guardrail. Not the signed complaint sitting in a drawer for 8 months. This was the moment everything that had been buried started coming up. Richard said, "Daniel Marsh was a problematic employee. The termination was standard procedure following repeated, 'I'd like to see the documentation.'" A folder was produced. Passed down the table. Claire read it at the table while everyone waited. While Richard watched her with the controlled expression of a man recalculating something in real time and not wanting anyone to see him do it. Then Claire opened her laptop, turned it so the room could see. Footage from the state road monitoring system on the mountain corridor. 90 seconds. Timestamp, 10:47 p.m. Wednesday evening. A pickup truck pulling to the shoulder, a figure going over the guardrail, minutes of nothing visible, then the figure coming back up the slope carrying another person, then the explosion, the figure continuing to move. Reaching the road, laying the other person down carefully, standing there for a moment in the rain, driving away at 11:03 p.m. The room watched in complete silence, then the GPS log from Daniel's company-issued delivery device. Last completed stop logged at 10:31 p.m. No movement inconsistent with a man who had stopped on a mountain road, then the 911 call, timestamped 11:01 p.m. A man's voice describing a woman's location and condition with specific precision. The room was very quiet, Richard said. This doesn't explain the abandonment of... The delivery was completed at 10:31, Claire said. GPS confirms it. He was on his way home. The meeting time was sent by text message at 11 p.m. the night before. He had a documented pattern of insubordination. You mean the safety complaint, flat? Not a question, Richard said nothing. Claire opened a second document, read items from it. An email from Richard to the maintenance supervisor directing him to defer brake inspections on 4 vehicles past their legal certification dates. 3 invoices for maintenance services with no corresponding service records. The Route 11 incident report, the original, unaltered one, alongside Holt Freight's internal closure report, which contradicted it in 12 specific ways. Just the facts, in sequence, without editorial comment, and then the door opened. Darnell Pruitt walked in. Nobody had announced him. He was just there, in the doorway of the conference room where he had once sat, while Richard Holt explained to him about team culture and operational trust, different posture than he'd had in Daniel's kitchen. Same man. The posture of someone who has decided something and the deciding is done. He walked to the table, put his phone face up on the surface, the photographs of the original incident report. 12 images, every page, timestamp in the corner of each, the morning of the Route 11 accident, before any subsequent version of anything existed. He didn't make a speech. He just stood there, because the photographs were already the speech. Richard Holt looked at the phone, at the images, at the timestamp, made the calculation people make when they realized the exit they believed was available is no longer there, said, loudly enough that it was clearly directed at the room as much as at Claire, that she had no right to come into his company. That this was a fabricated case assembled by a disgruntled employee and a woman with a personal agenda. That any reasonable person would question a buyer appearing immediately after a termination, said it with more confidence than the situation warranted. Several people in the room shifted in their chairs, not toward him, away. Cobb, who had been looking at his notepad for the better part of an hour, looked up. His voice was not loud, not dramatic. The voice of a man who has been quiet too long and is aware the time for that is over. I knew the complaint was legitimate. When Daniel filed it, I knew, swallowed. I didn't do anything. The room absorbed that. Richard looked at Cobb with an expression that cycled through several options before settling on stunned disbelief. Not at the betrayal exactly, but at the specific moment chosen for it, Claire said. Mr. Holt, you're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full compliance audit. Copies of today's documentation are being forwarded to the State Transportation Authority and to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. She nodded to Kevin, who had been told what his job was this morning and had decided he was going to do it properly, walked around the table. Richard stood. The chair went back. He looked at the room, at the people who had worked for him, around him, under him, for years, looking for something in their faces. Not finding it, before he reached the door, he turned, not to Claire, to the empty chair at the end of the table where Daniel Marsh was not sitting. Said something. About consequences. About what Daniel would regret. Nobody wrote it down. Kevin walked him out. The door closed. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Claire looked at Naomi and Naomi opened a third folder. Daniel Marsh received the call at 11:15 that morning. He was at the kitchen table, same chair, different morning. He had, in the past 5 days since termination, developed a specific relationship with this chair and this table and the mathematics they witnessed together. He knew the exact angle of morning light on the wood. He knew which leg of the chair creaked when he shifted weight. He answered the unknown number on the second ring, Naomi Ashford. Same precise voice, Mr. Marsh. Claire Weston would like to see you this morning if you're available. Is this about signing something that releases them from the back pay? A brief pause. No, is the truck still running? A different pause, slightly longer. Which truck? The one from Route 11. Fleet number in the complaint. Is it still running a corridor? He heard Naomi typing. Then stopping. It's currently registered as active in the Holtford fleet, yes. Then, before I agree to anything, Daniel said that truck needs to come out of rotation. Today. Not pending audit. Not pending review. Today, hold please. Muffled sounds of a brief conversation. Couldn't make out words. Could make out tone. Clipped. Decisive. Naomi came back. Done. I'll come in. He drove to the hotel, meeting room. Same drive as the first time. Different feeling going in. The first time he hadn't known what it was. This time he had a general sense of the shape of it. Still wasn't entirely prepared for the specific way. Claire Weston looked at him when he walked through the door. Not gratitude. Something more complicated than gratitude. The way someone looks at you when they've been thinking about you in a specific way for several days and have come to a conclusion. Sit down. He sat. The meeting this morning went the way it needed to go. She opened a folder. Didn't push it toward him yet. Richard Holt is suspended. The regulatory referrals are filed. The documentation is with both the state authority and the FMCSA. A pause. Darnell Pruitt was there, I know. He didn't tell you he was coming? He texted me after, a brief silence. What did he say? Daniel looked at the table, then at Claire. Almost smiled. Not quite, he said. Felt like the right time. Something moved in Claire's expression. Just briefly. Just enough, she said. I want to offer you a position. Operations Safety Supervisor. Your job would be to rebuild the maintenance protocols from the ground up, work directly with the drivers. Make sure what happened, what was allowed to happen, doesn't happen again. Daniel said nothing for a moment. Did I say something wrong? No. He looked at the table. I'm thinking about whether I can do the job well. I don't need someone with a logistics management degree. I need someone who knows what it actually costs a driver to do his job. The financial cost. The physical cost. The cost of raising a family on those wages and still finding it in yourself to be honest about problems the company wants to ignore. She paused. You've lived that. I need that knowledge in every decision this company makes going forward. The other drivers, they'll question it. A man being rewarded for a personal connection to ownership. I've thought about that. She met his eyes. The answer is in how you do the job. He was quiet. Then, one condition. Before I sign anything, go ahead. Every driver who had wages wrongfully withheld, everyone, including the ones who left years ago, including Darnell Pruitt, made whole. Before I sign, already done. Including Darnell Pruitt. With interest, he looked at her. I had it processed Friday afternoon. Before the meeting this morning, he was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the past 5 days. The kitchen table math, the calculator, the prescription refill, the specific arithmetic of a working man with no income and a daughter with asthma, shifted slightly. Not gone. Lighter. The way a load becomes lighter when someone else puts their hand under it. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll take it? Okay, I'll take it, Naomi. In the corridor on the way out, said one thing. She stayed up until 2 a.m. reading your original complaint. Every page. Both nights, Daniel said. She didn't need to do that. I know. That's not why she did it. He thought about that on the drive home, about what it meant that someone had read something carefully. Not quickly, not to extract the useful parts. Carefully, with attention. The way you read something when you want to understand the person who wrote it. He thought about the 8 months between the writing and the reading, about the drawer. About how many things end up in drawers, not because they aren't true, but because the person holding the drawer decides the cost of acknowledging the truth is higher than the cost of not acknowledging it. He thought about Cobb looking up from his notepad. I knew the complaint was legitimate. I didn't do anything, and August Riley, who had lived in the apartment below for 4 years and had gently, without fanfare, made a phone call that connected a 14-month-old unmatched database entry to a fleet registration to a truck still running a mountain road. And Darnell Pruitt, who had kept photographs on his phone for 9 months because he couldn't bring himself to delete them. None of them had known what the others were doing. No coordination, no plan, no agreement. Just 3 separate people who had each carried a piece of something they couldn't put down and had each, at the right moment, found someone to put it down with. He pulled into his building's parking lot. sat in the truck for a moment. Upstairs, Sophie would be home from school in 40 minutes. Science project about ecosystems. Hadn't started it, was going to need help with the decomposers section, which she found both fascinating and deeply unsettling in equal measure. He got out. Started up the stairs. Third floor, he passed August Riley's door. Closed. From inside, the quiet sounds of the evening news at low volume. He stopped. Knocked once. August opened the door. Looked at him with the patient attention of someone who has been waiting to hear how something turned out and has been too polite to ask. The truck came out of rotation this morning, Daniel said. Walt Bridger's office has the full file. August was quiet then. Good, just that. Good. He closed the door. Daniel stood in the hallway for a moment. Then went to his apartment and started water for pasta, because Sophie liked pasta on school nights, and because some things should stay ordinary even when other things don't. He had a job, a real one, a different kind. And somewhere down the mountain corridor, a truck with bad brakes was sitting in a depot instead of running a road. For now, that was enough. His first week on the job, Daniel Marsh did something nobody expected. He didn't go to his new office. He went to the depot, 6 a.m., before anyone else arrived. Before the dispatchers, before the drivers, before the day shift maintenance crew who showed up at 6:30 with coffee cups and the resigned energy of people who have learned not to expect mornings to be good, only manageable. He walked the lot, every truck, every trailer. Every vehicle in the fleet, which was not called Holt Freight anymore, technically, but the new signs hadn't gone up yet, and the old name was still on everything, peeling slightly at the corners on the older vehicles, which told you something about how long certain things had been left unattended. He walked slowly, didn't rush. Carried a clipboard not because anyone told him to, because writing things down is how you know later what you actually saw versus what you think you remember. He checked tires, fluid levels, brake lines, opened hoods and looked at engines the way he had looked at engines for 15 years, not scanning, actually looking. The kind of attention that notices the thing that doesn't belong, and the thing that's missing, and the thing that's been there so long. People stopped seeing it. He found 14 items needing immediate attention, not eventually. Not pending next scheduled maintenance, immediately. Wrote them all down. Fleet numbers. Specific deficiencies. Regulatory citation for each one. Brought the list to Claire at 7:30. She read it, without expression. Then looked up. How long have some of these been like this? Best guess? 6 to 18 months? A pause. Start with the worst ones, she said. Already have 3 in the shop. She looked at him. I started at 5:30. He was not a perfect supervisor. He knew this and didn't pretend otherwise. Which was, as it turned out, the first thing that made people trust him. Because supervisors who pretend to know everything create a specific kind of silence around themselves. The silence of people who have learned that admitting a problem to management creates more problems than not admitting it. The silence that lets bad brakes run mountain roads for 14 months. Daniel didn't create that silence. He created the opposite. The atmosphere of a man who was going to find out anyway, so you might as well tell him first. Who responded to information with action rather than discipline. So the risk of telling him was low, and the risk of not telling him was considerably higher. Drivers figured this out within 2 weeks. Not because he gave a speech. Because he showed up, 6 a.m. in the depot. Out in the yard on cold mornings with his clipboard. In the shop when mechanics were working, asking questions that weren't tests. Actual questions from genuine curiosity, the kind you ask when you want to understand something, rather than confirm what you already know. The skeptical ones came around, not all at once. Gradually, the way trust accumulates, not through any single moment, but through the repetitions of small consistent things. A problem reported Thursday, fixed by Friday. A driver's concern about a route written down, followed up on, answered. The maintenance log updated in real time, accessible to anyone who wanted to look. The specific luxury of having a boss who didn't make you feel stupid for knowing things. Winifred Okafor. Dispatcher, 11 years. The kind of institutional memory that keeps an operation honest when nothing else does. Had left a plant on Daniel's desk his first morning and never mentioned it. By the 3rd week, she was stopping by his office to tell him things she had been observing for years and never had anyone to tell. Not complaints. Observations. The way a driver on the South Corridor consistently ran 15 minutes late on Tuesdays. because of a construction merge the routing software didn't account for. The way overnight loads were calculated with a margin that looked fine on paper but left drivers under pressure in reality. The way 3 different drivers had, in the past year, quietly requested route changes that when you mapped them together, pointed to a stretch of the western corridor where something about the road made people uncomfortable. Daniel wrote all of it down. Then drove Vogel's corridor stretched himself on a Thursday afternoon, came back, wrote a 1-page assessment, sent it to the State Road Authority with the specific language of a man who has learned that specificity is the difference between a letter that gets read and a letter that gets filed. The road authority sent someone out the following week, found a drainage problem causing the road surface to degrade under heavy load in wet conditions. Within a month, Winifred put a second plant on Daniel's desk after that, slightly larger. Still didn't say anything, just put it there and went back to her station. He kept that one too. Darnell Pruitt came back, not immediately. Took 3 weeks and a conversation Daniel didn't push, just left open the way you leave a door open for someone who needs to decide for themselves when they're ready to walk through it. The call came on a Tuesday morning. You have anything for a guy who drove the North Corridor for 3 years and knows every bad stretch of road between here and the junction? Yeah, what's the pay? Daniel told him. A pause. That's more than Holt was paying, different company now. Another pause. Shorter, I'll need Thursdays off. My kid has a thing on Thursdays. What kind of thing? Soccer. He's not good at it, but he likes it. Thursdays are yours. Okay, then. He started the following Monday. By end of that first week, he had already flagged 2 road conditions Daniel hadn't mapped yet and submitted them in writing, unprompted, in the format the State Road Authority used. Because Darnell Pruitt had also, apparently, learned to be precise about these things. Daniel read the submissions and felt something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite relief, but lived somewhere in the same neighborhood as both. The compliance audit took 6 weeks. Conducted by an independent firm Claire hired because she understood that an audit commissioned by ownership and conducted internally was not audit, it was a document. A real audit needed real distance. What it found was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention. The scope of what Richard Holt had built, not in a week or a year, but over 2 decades of incremental decisions, was the kind of thing that becomes visible only when you step far enough back to see the whole shape of it. Each individual choice had been small, defensible. Each deferral of a maintenance schedule, each adjusted log entry, each incident report filed in a drawer had its own local justification. Added together, they formed something else entirely. The regulatory referrals were forwarded to 3 separate agencies. The FMCSA, the State Transportation Authority, and because 2 of the incidents involved falsified documentation submitted to a federal agency, the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General. Richard Holt retained a defense attorney. After that, he said nothing publicly. Whatever he had expected his life to look like at 51. And he had expected quite a lot of things, in quite a lot of detail. It had not looked like this. The confidence that had carried him through 20 years of cutting corners had curdled into something cold and quiet that sat in his chest, where the confidence used to be. He was going to need a long time to reckon with it. The trucks he had left running were not his problem anymore. They were Daniel's, and Daniel was fixing them. One by one, systematically. The way you fix something that matters. Not fast, not cheap, but correctly, because the cost of not doing it correctly eventually shows up on a mountain road at night in the rain, and you don't always get to be the one who goes over the guardrail. The truck from Route 11 was in the back corner of the depot lot. Daniel found it on his 3rd day, almost missed it. Parked behind 2 larger trailers, not in active rotation, not flagged for any scheduled work. It had been pulled from the corridor when Richard was suspended, and then, in the chaos of ownership transition and audit preparation, simply left there, not decommissioned. Not inspected, just parked, waiting for someone to notice. Daniel noticed. He stood beside it for a moment. This was the truck Darnell Pruitt had been driving 14 months ago, when the brakes hesitated on a descending grade and a fence, and part of a retaining wall absorbed the consequences that could have been so much worse. The truck that had generated a report, and a stamp, and a conversation about team culture, and nothing else. He didn't feel angry. He wasn't past anger. You don't get entirely past it when you understand the full shape of what had been allowed to happen. But what he felt standing next to this specific truck in the morning light was something more like determination. The quiet, functional kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. He went and got his tools, spent the better part of 2 days on that truck, not delegating, not supervising, doing the work himself. Because some things you need to do yourself to feel that they have been done right. Went through the brake system component by component, found what he expected to find, and then found 2 additional things he hadn't expected, which was always how it went when something had been deferred long enough, documented everything. Before photographs, after photographs, parts replaced, hours worked, regulatory standards met. When he was done, he drove it. Down the service road behind the depot. Slow, then faster, tested the response at different speeds, different grades. Let it tell him what it knew now versus what it had known before. It told him it was ready, brought it back to the lot, wrote it up for return to active rotation, pending final independent certification, which was the new protocol. No vehicle went back on the road without a sign-off from an independent inspector, because the old protocol had been what it had been, and they weren't doing that anymore. He stood next to it for a moment after Darnell was across the lot, running pre-trip on a different vehicle. He looked up. Saw Daniel, saw the truck, didn't say anything. Neither did Daniel. They didn't need to. The company name changed on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, Marsh and Weston Freight. No announcement, no ceremony, no press release. Claire had suggested a formal event, and Daniel said he'd rather not, and Claire thought about that for a moment and said she agreed. So it just appeared on the building signage first, because the sign crew worked overnight. Then on the vehicles, which took 3 days. Then on the letterhead and invoices and fleet registration documents and the driver handbooks Daniel had spent 6 weeks rewriting from scratch, because the old ones were a legal document designed to protect the company from its workers rather than a practical guide for people doing a difficult job. The drivers noticed, not all at once, one by one, over the course of the week, as they came in for shifts and saw their vehicles and saw their names on the side of something that had a different name now. Nobody made a speech, nobody needed to. Kevin, the security guard, stopped by Daniel's office on Thursday after the name change. I just wanted to say something. Okay, Kevin stood in the doorway. Processing, when I walked you out. I wanted to say something then. I should have. I didn't. Daniel looked at him. You were doing your job, I know. But Kevin, not unkind, just direct. You're here now. Kevin stood there for another second, then nodded once, and went back to his station. That was all. That was enough. Claire came to dinner in November, Sophie's idea. Not Daniel's. Sophie had mentioned it approximately 4 times over 3 weeks, each time framed slightly differently, which was her way of pursuing something she wanted without appearing to campaign for it. First time, casual, almost accidental. Winifred says Ms. Weston works really long hours. Does she ever eat dinner with people? Second time, informational. I was reading about what it's like when someone saves your life. It said the grateful person sometimes wants to do something for the other person, like cook for them. Third time, specific. I could make my pasta. I've gotten better. Fourth time, direct. Because Sophie had decided the indirect approach was taking too long. Dad, invite her to dinner. I want to meet her properly. Not just at the door, Daniel said. She's busy, Sophie said. Did you ask? He hadn't. He asked. Claire said yes before he finished the sentence. Then, tell Sophie the vanilla cake was the best cake I've had in years. Daniel relayed this to Sophie. Sophie said, she has good taste, then went to check that she had enough pasta. Claire arrived on a Saturday at 6 p.m., had taken a car rather than driving herself, which was a choice she'd been making since the accident, when the combination of mountain roads and rain had recalibrated something in her relationship with being behind a wheel at speed. She didn't talk about this, but she didn't fight it either. She stood outside Daniel's building, looked up at 3 stories of a building that had seen better decades, elevator out of service. Sign on the elevator door so weathered the original date of posting was no longer legible, which told you something about elapsed time and the landlord's intentions. She took the stairs, 3rd floor, end of the hall. Door with a small mark on the frame or something. A bicycle handlebar, she guessed, had caught it at some point. She knocked, the door opened. Sophie Marsh, 8 years old, yellow sweater. the kind of watchful intelligence in her eyes that children develop when they've been paying close attention to the world for a while and decided it warrants and careful observation. She looked at Claire, then at the box, then at Claire. "Is it your birthday too?" "No. I missed yours and I wanted to apologize." Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Okay," she said. "Come in." The kitchen was small, which meant the table was close to everything. The counter, the window, the stove where water was already heating for pasta. Photographs on the refrigerator, 2 plants on the windowsill, one slightly larger than the other, both recently watered, and a photograph on the shelf above the stove, a woman. Dark hair, laughing at something off camera, the kind of photograph that exists because someone caught a real moment instead of a posed one. Claire didn't ask about it, but she noted it. Because you note the things that tell you who a person is when no one is making a case for them. Daniel appeared from the kitchen area with a dish towel over his shoulder and the expression of a man who was given less warning about this visit than he would have preferred but is managing. "You didn't have to bring anything." Sophie made a specific request. He stopped, looked at his daughter. "What did you request?" Sophie was already opening the box, the good bakery, not the grocery store one. She examined the contents with professional thoroughness. Looked up. "Vanilla?" "Vanilla," Claire confirmed. Sophie looked satisfied. "Good. Dad, the water's boiling." Daniel returned to the stove. Claire sat at the kitchen table, and Sophie sat across from her and propped her chin on her hands and looked at Claire with the direct, unself-conscious attention of someone who has decided to form an opinion and is gathering data. "Dad says you're good at your job," Sophie said. "I try to be. What does your job actually do? Like for people. Not just for the company." Claire thought about that right now. "It's making sure the people who drive trucks on mountain roads have vehicles that are safe and get paid fairly and can go home to their families when they're supposed to." Sophie processed this. "That sounds important." "I think so." Sophie nodded slowly. "Then, my dad almost lost his job to save yours." Silence. From the stove, Daniel said, "Sophie, I'm not being rude. I'm being accurate. She should know." Sophie looked at her father, then back at Claire. "I'm not saying it like it's bad. I'm saying it because it's true and because I think she probably thinks about it." Claire looked at this 8-year-old for a moment. This watchful, precise, unsentimental 8-year-old in a yellow sweater who had waited alone at a kitchen table with a candle burning down on her birthday and had woken up and not cried and had said exactly the right thing. "You're right," Claire said. "I do think about it." Sophie appeared satisfied. "Okay then." She got up to help with the pasta. They ate at the small table. 3 people. 2 plants on the windowsill. The photograph on the shelf, not a formal dinner. Pasta from a pot with sauce from a jar that Daniel had improved considerably with things from the cabinet. Bread, slightly past its best day but fine when warmed. And the cake, which Sophie served with the gravity of a ceremony. She cut 3 slices, largest for herself. Equal portions for the adults. Daniel noted this. So did Claire. Neither mentioned it. The conversation moved the way conversation moves when people are still finding the edges of each other's company. Carefully at first, then with more confidence as silences stopped feeling like gaps and started feeling like pauses. Sophie talked about her science project, about decomposers. The entire category was, in her assessment, both essential and deeply unsettling. "They eat dead things," she said, with the tone of someone who respected a process they did not entirely endorse. "That's what makes new things possible," Claire said. Sophie looked at her. "That's actually a good point," Sophie said, with the specific grudging respect of a child who did not expect an adult to have a good point and is recalibrating. Claire didn't look smug about this, just ate her pasta. At some point, Daniel refilled the water glasses, and Claire looked across the table at a man with pasta sauce on his dish towel and a photograph of his late wife on the shelf, and a daughter who cross-examined dinner guests with the focus of a federal prosecutor, and she thought about something she had been thinking about since the hospital. She had built Weston Capital from a position of considerable advantage. Access, capital, education, early success compounding into later success, compounding into the ability to make phone calls that got answered and signed documents that moved things. She had told herself for years that what she built reflected her values. Daniel Marsh had made the same claims on values, with none of those advantages, in the rain. on a mountain road, at 10:47 at night, with a daughter waiting at home. With a job already precarious and a medication refill due at the end of the month, she had survived because of that. She sat with what that meant for a long time, quietly. With pasta going cold on her plate, "You stopped eating," Sophie said. "I was thinking." "About what?" Claire looked at Daniel. Ho was watching her with the attention of someone who had not been watching her, and then suddenly was. "About how expensive it is to be the kind of person your father is," she said, "and how he did it anyway." The kitchen was quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Sophie picked up her fork. "Yeah," she said. Simply, like something she had known for a long time. After dinner, Sophie went to finish her homework. Daniel washed the dishes. Claire sat at the table and drank the last of her water and didn't offer to help and didn't leave, which was its own kind of thing. He said, without turning around, "She interrogates everyone, I noticed. She doesn't mean anything by it, I know. She means everything by it." "Those are different things," he turned around. Claire was looking at the photograph on the shelf, not with the careful not looking of someone pretending it wasn't there. With direct, open attention. He dried his hands. "That's Laura," he said. "She looks like she's laughing at something good." She was. He looked at the photograph for a moment. She always was, a pause. Not awkward. Just real. She'd have liked Sophie. Claire said, the way Sophie turned out, she'd have taken full credit for it. Something close to a smile from Claire. "Sophie's right, you know. I do think about it. Every day. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. That's not why I do it." She set down her glass. "I think about the fact that you went over that guardrail and you didn't know who I was. Didn't know about the acquisition. Didn't know any of it. You just went because there was a person in the car." A pause. "Most people tell themselves they would do that. You actually did. Anyone decent would have. Stop saying that." He looked at her. "I know you mean it literally. But you have to understand. That quality, that actual functioning decency that acts instead of tells itself stories about what it would do, it's not as common as you think it is." She held his gaze. "I've been in business for 20 years. I've met a lot of people. I know how rare it is." He was quiet. "Doesn't make it less true?" "No," she said. "It doesn't." From Sophie's room, the sound of pencil scratching, the occasional murmur of a child reading something aloud to check if it makes sense. Claire said, "I want to tell you something about the company. About what I want it to be." "Okay, not tonight." "I've already taken up your Saturday." She stood carefully. The ribs were better but still had opinions. "There's a board presentation in 6 weeks. I want your input on the safety framework before then. Not Naomi's summary of your input. Yours, you'll have it," she put on her jacket. He walked her to the door. She stopped in the doorway, looked back at the kitchen, the table, the plants, the photograph on the shelf. "Thank you for dinner." "Thanks, Sophie," from down the hall. "You're welcome," Sophie's voice, muffled by the bedroom door. Not eavesdropping, just paying attention. The way you do when you've grown up in a home where the people who love you don't always say directly what they're feeling, so you learn to hear it in the smaller things. Later, after Sophie was in bed and the apartment was quiet, Daniel sat at the kitchen table. Same table. Different weight. The medications were refilled. The rent was current. The savings account had numbers in it that didn't require him to look away. These were facts he had not let himself fully register. Not because they weren't real, but because the habit of bracing for the math is hard to let go of, even when the math has changed. He let himself register them now. He thought about Darnell Pruitt flagging road conditions on his second week back. Unprompted. In the correct format. Because Darnell was also a person who had learned to be precise about things. He thought about Winifred Okafor and her plants and 11 years of observations that finally had somewhere to go. He thought about Kevin standing in the doorway saying, "I should have said something." And August Riley. One floor below, who had not said "you're welcome" or accepted thanks or made any portion of this about himself. Who had just gently, without drama, put 30 years of expertise in the path of a problem that needed it. He thought about what August had said at the end. "I just did what I should have done when I was still working." That sentence had weight. The weight of a man looking back at a long career and finding the specific place where he had looked the other way and deciding that the rest of his life would be different. It was possible to do that. To look back and find the place. And then not let it be the end of the story. On a Wednesday morning in late November, Daniel drove the mountain road. no particular reason. He had an early meeting, and the direct route was faster. But he took the mountain road anyway. The way you sometimes take the long way, not because you have time for it, but because something in you needs the specific quality of attention a difficult road requires. The mountains were sharp and cold, frost on the northern faces, the ravine below in shadow, and there, around mile marker 7, a section of new metal in the guardrail where the older metal had been. Slightly different color. Slightly cleaner. He slowed, not stopped, just slowed. Enough to see it clearly. The new metal, the repaired section. The place where the physics of one ordinary Wednesday night had been recorded into the structure of the road. He drove on. Sophie caught him that evening. Not at dinner. After. She'd been doing homework, and he'd been reviewing fraught fleet on documentation at the kitchen table, and at some point she came out for water and stood in the doorway watching him before she said anything. "You went past the guardrail place this morning?" He looked up. "Winifred again?" "No. You. You had the same face at breakfast." He set down the papers. Sophie came and sat in the chair across from him. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah. Do you wish it hadn't happened?" "The accident. All of it. Getting fired and all the hard stuff." He thought about that honestly. Not the answer he was supposed to give. The actual answer, "I wish the road was safe before that night," he said. "I wish the complaint had been read. I wish Darnell's report had been acted on. I wish August had caught it when he was still inspecting." He paused. "There were a lot of things I wish had been different, but you can't undo the path. You can only be responsible for what you do on it." So Sophie looked at him. "Is that something from a book?" "No, it sounds like something from a book. It's just something I think is true." She was quiet. Processing then, "Is Miss Weston going to come to dinner again?" He looked at his daughter, who was looking at him with the expression of someone who has asked a casual question and would very much like a casual answer. "I think she might." "Okay." She got up. Took her water glass. Went back toward her room. Then stopped. "Dad, yeah. I think Mom would be proud of you. I've thought that for a while. I just wanted to say it out loud." She went to her room. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment, looked at the photograph on the shelf, Laura laughing. Off camera at something good. Always at something good. He sat with it for a while. Outside the kitchen window, the mountains were dark against a sky holding the last thin light of the day. The city below coming on, a slow spread of amber and white, building to building, block to block, all the ordinary lives going on in the ordinary way they go on when things are on balance. Okay. Somewhere in the valley, a driver with Marsh and Weston freight was running the North Corridor. Vehicle certified that morning. Logs honest. Brakes working the way brakes are supposed to work. Going home at the end of the shift to the people who were waiting. A year ago that wasn't true. Now it was. The plant from Winifred needed watering. He watered it, then the second one, the slightly larger one, went to bed. Tomorrow, 6 a.m., deep clipboard. Whatever the trucks needed, he'd find out.